You're listening to She's the Business podcast. How many times have you felt the urge to change your brand? And probably not for any real reason, but for the reason that it just doesn't feel quite right to you, or there's something that you could improve, or you're looking at it every day and yet you really need a color change to make it feel fresh. Well, there are plenty of good reasons why you might be ready for a rebrand, but those generally aren't any of them. So today we're bringing you the 7 reasons why you might really be ready for a rebrand, and how to know when that is the right time for you. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Osborne, and in my 23 years of business and marketing, I've built many brands to become multi-billion-dollar companies. And just in the last 10 years, I've built 2 online businesses of my own from my dining room table with 2 little babies running around at my feet. I've made it my mission to inspire you to get out of your own way and become the successful business owner who's living the lifestyle you really desire without all the hustle. This is She's the Business podcast, made by women for women. This is your weekly dose of motivation and inspiration. As soon as you started your business, your brand started to exist. And as my guest today, Bec Hughes, she's a brand consultant, coach, and creator, says on her website, brand is to business what coffee is to mornings. You pretty much cannot have one without the other. And it is a super, super important part of your strategy of how you are positioned in the market, how you're perceived, your reputation, and of course, how you're able to attract the right clients. Brand is a really critical ingredient in the recipe of your marketing. So it's not something to be overlooked at all. Now, Bec Hughes has been immersed in branding for over 2 decades. So she brings a wealth of experience to brand strategy. And today I'm really thrilled to bring her on to talk to us all about the 7 reasons why you might be ready for a rebrand. We've both seen many times where businesses do a rebrand at not the right time and for the wrong reasons. But there are good reasons to rebrand when it is appropriate, and it is a big undertaking. So, we don't want to do this lightly. We want to do it at the right time and do it strategically so that you get the outcome you're really wanting. Now, you will be able to find out more about Bec Hughes on her website, which is bechughes.com. And also she's on Instagram at Bec Hughes Branding. I'll link up her website and her socials in the show notes so you can go there to find out more about her. Now, without further ado, let's play the interview for you. Hello, everybody. I am joining you today with a very interesting topic. We've been talking a bit about branding this week, but this is about the reasons to rebrand. So there are really good reasons to rebrand, and there's some reasons not to rebrand. And I have got the fabulous Bec Hughes from Bec Hughes Branding, who is joining me today to share her 7 reasons why it is a good idea to rebrand. Like, when do you know that it's the right time versus, when is not the right time? So something that I see quite a lot, I guess, in online circles with people who are in business. Hey, Bec.
Hello.
Join me. Hi. Something that I see quite often is that people, treat branding, they might be feeling like, oh, something's not quite working with my business. Why aren't I attracting the customers that I want? Oh, I know, it must be to do with my brand. And, they start fiddling around with their brand colors, and maybe it's not on trend, and maybe that's the reason why it's not happening. And, that could go on and on and on forever. You honestly could spend so much time tweaking your visual. When I'm talking about that, I'm really talking about the superficial layer of the visual brand elements, not the core brand strategy. And there's a huge difference between the two. We're going to get into some of that in just a moment. What are the other reasons that you see out there, Bec, where, people are attempting a rebrand potentially at the wrong time? What are they doing?
Look, I think it happens all the time. And I think what I always say is your intuition is very important. So if you intuitively feel like you need to rebrand, then there's probably something in that. But very often you haven't kind of dug a bit deeper to find out what the real reason is. And if you don't know the real reason, then you're not solving the right problem. So those reasons like, I don't like it, I'm bored with it, is often a big reason. Oh, I've lived with this brand for 2 years now, I'm bored, I fancy a different colour. That's not a great reason. Someone else didn't like it. Very often someone, a family member or, one of the mums at school kind of makes a comment and that makes you think you should do something about it. But particularly if they're not your target audience, then it's time to take that with a grain of salt.
Yes.
So those more kind of, I suppose, arbitrary reasons are all the things that come up where you should look beyond those and try and find the real strategic reason.
Yeah, and I think that taps into something I was talking about earlier this week, was when you're creating your brand, if you have based it literally on what other people think or what you think the trend is out there, then you are going to be in this constant state of wonder, like, is my brand right? Is it what people like? Am I on trend? Am I not on trend? And thinking that you need to change it all the time. And, to be honest, I feel like you've approached the whole brand process from the wrong angle to begin with, because your brand is about you. It's your core essence. And if you've gone from within and figured out what your essence is and then brought that to life through your brand, then it's not something that changes overnight. It doesn't change in a year. You may need to refresh it, and we'll get into when is the right time to do a refresh. When do you know that your brand is due for a facelift, an upgrade, or whatever that is? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But yes, I can see that, that could be a question to ask yourself, was really, when you created your brand, were you asking other people what they liked, or were you creating it based on the actual core values and, your own personality traits and really your own essence? And if you have done that, then your brand should be a reflection of you. It shouldn't need to be rebranded until you've reached a certain stage. So that's, I guess, a really nice segue into when is the right time? When are you ready for a rebrand? So can you tell us what I think you've got seven.
I've got seven
moments. Yeah,
I had to keep it to 7. But there are loads and loads of reasons, but I suppose there are kind of some common themes that come up. And the biggest common theme for me is that you've kind of outgrown your brand. And that's not a negative or a bad thing. I think often people think, I didn't do it right in the first place, and therefore, I shouldn't need to do it again. I've made an error. But that's not the case. You can absolutely outgrow your brand. And there is very much a life cycle of branding. And I think probably close to 100% of the clients I work with have gone through the process where they created a brand in the early days because they just wanted to test their concept. They wanted to get up and running. They didn't want to invest a huge amount of money, which is perfectly acceptable and fine. And I understand that. But then they're 2 years in and they've really proved the concept, they've evolved, and now it's time to revisit and reinvest. So a really big one, a common one, and one that is a really positive reason to rebrand is that you've outgrown it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I actually often say to people when they're starting out, I'm like, you do not need to go to a big, deep level right now. If you don't understand it, if you're not sure what you're doing, just get started, get it out there. No one is really going to, depending on how much you change your brand, but you can change it. And that's the thing, it can evolve with you. And it's at that right time where you're ready, where you're like, now I'm established, I know who I want to be, I know what I want to say. It's a much better time to go into the real brand strategy and build your brand from there. Whereas you can get started with just your visual elements, and all that's doing is helping you get some consistency across what you're putting out there. So
yeah, and sometimes you just got to start. But I think, and that leads into, I suppose, another reason, which is very often when we start a brand, we start it with a kind of an idea in mind of what we're going to do. And I'll use an analogy, which is, the cookie queen, let's say. Yeah. And that's what the cookie queen was going to do. Her brand was going to be about making cookies and make everyone happy with these beautiful cookies. But then over time, that's evolved. And now the cookie queen wants to offer cakes and other kind of confections. And where she started with her branding has meant that it's not scalable, because she's kind of locked herself down into this kind of positioning, which is a bit of a mismatch of where she wants to go. So that's kind of another reason, which is kind of very similar to outgrowing your branding, but it's more about, you may well outgrow the positioning of your branding that you kind of started with, and now you want to scale, or you want to evolve, or the other way, you want to niche more. And now there's a bit of a mismatch between where your brand is and where you want to take your business. And that's a really good reason to reconsider and think about how your branding is going to become more focused.
Yes, definitely. And that's exactly when I, work with my clients, when they're really, their market positioning is changing. They might be pivoting, they might be niching down further, which is usually what happens when they're working with me, or they're really trying to say, that's the part that I want to be known for. That's the area of the market where I want to build my reputation. And to have your brand aligned to it just makes it such a much stronger proposition to put out there to the market, because people will recognize it and they'll, begin to associate you with that, as opposed to you being in a maybe more generalist space. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think what happens then is that you can get a much clearer communication in your branding. So you might have started with this really broad net that's kind of saying a lot of things, but maybe that also lacks a bit of clarity. So you can start to kind of boil things down and become a lot clearer in your communications as well, which I think is really, really powerful with your brand. And that kind of mismatch, I suppose, leads on to the third reason, which is also a potential mismatch with your audience. Sometimes your audience may change, they may evolve themselves, or you may also get a much better understanding of who your audience is, or some of the, I suppose, deeper drivers of your audience, their mindset drivers, some of the emotional reasons why they might connect with your brand. So you've gained that better understanding, but your brand doesn't really get to the heart of that. So when you start to find that there's a bit of a mismatch with, and also your audience needs may have changed, they may have become more aware or more motivated about new things as they've evolved. One of those might be issues of sustainability, for example. People become more aware about materials or manufacturing processes. So you might want to evolve your brand to more closely align with what your audience needs and what they're looking for. And again, it's that thing where you start very generic and you start quite broad, but there comes a time where you've got much more clarity, a better understanding, and you want to imbue that into your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think even with, brands that are quite personal brands, as you grow, and you might go from where you had been young and, maybe it was really what would I call it? Somebody without kids who's young, and then, you move into the next life stage and you feel like, well, that doesn't really reflect me and who I am, the essence of me anymore, because I've changed. And, 10 years down the track, you're going to be feeling quite different. So, I think there's definitely those phases where it's about connecting with you are, and also where your audience is as well, because if they've moved with you, they're also no longer the young funky teenagers or early 20s that they used to be.
And that's very true. I think that particularly in service-based businesses, I think you often find that as you evolve, your audience will evolve with you in either their life stage or what they need, what they're looking for. It just happens and it happens naturally because people are drawn to the people who are like them. And you want to always make sure that they feel like there's a very peer-to-peer kind of conversation going on. So there can often be that kind of mismatch between you and where you were 5 years ago and where you and your audience are now.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
Look, another a reason that comes up a fair bit, and this is perhaps one of my personal favourites. Because it's so easy to resolve in many ways, but I understand how it happens, is your brand can become diluted over time. And this kind of links to one of the reasons not to rebrand, which is I became bored, or I just wanted to try on a different colour palette, and I tinkered with that for a while, and then I kind of went to something else, but I kept certain bits of my brand, and your brand kind of evolves over time into a bit of a mishmash. And everybody involved, including you, is a little bit confused about where really the heart of it is. And that can be the visual. So that can be how it's supposed to look. Sometimes it looks one way, you know, an Instagram post one week looks different to the next week because you just kind of have been feeling your way. Or that can happen in your messaging as well. Your messaging can become inconsistent because, you know, you're starting to try on different ways of communicating. But over time, things become a little bit diluted. So absolutely. I think that when you kind of get to that point where you've become a bit confused, things have become a little bit inconsistent. You've, as I like to say, you've created a bit of a camel with your branding. You started off with a beautiful horse and you stuck 2 humps on it and it kind of all went a bit awry.
I know everything always starts off so lovely and consistent, and then the longer it goes on, the more you tweak things, you edit things, and then all of a sudden you've got lots of stuff out there that is saying different things altogether. So, you know, then bringing it all back together and saying, right, what is the message that we really want to give? What is that key message? And sometimes I think it may not be so much in the visuals, but certainly your brand messaging and strategy, I think is something that evolves a lot more and more frequently for me than the visuals even. You know, you can make tiny tweaks to, I think, visual, you know, potentially like graphic styles, still staying within your overall brand style. But the messaging is something that, you know, I think it evolves so quickly, especially depending on how much content you're putting out there.
It does. And it's kind of what I always think of it as death by tweaking, really, is that it kind of evolves over time. And I do it like, you know, you tweak to the point where you can't get back. You kind of go, I've come too far, and what, you know, where do I go back to? And it just all becomes a little bit confused. And that's a really good time to regroup, because it could be you've got to intuitively almost the right place, but it just needs a bit of extra shaping, a little bit of extra help to bring it all together and to give it some clarity.
Absolutely. And just make sure that all of those points are then consistent. So, you know, because you might have evolved your messaging, but then there could be some things that actually aren't connected anymore. They've become unaligned. You know, I like to talk to people because sometimes they don't really realize things like, you know, if you're trying to be a real and authentic brand, then using imagery that's not real and authentic is totally against what you're saying your brand is. So, you know, everything that you use in your brand, whether it's your wording, whether it's how you sound, you know, what you're doing, what you're saying, how you look, the images that you use, all should align towards those same core ingredients of the brand, or if it's values, you know, they should be presented, I guess, through all of those different mediums, so that we get that sense of this is an authentic brand. You know, the photos that they use are authentic photos. They're not, you know, highly, what would you call it? You know, when they've like really photoshopped fake stock photos, don't do well with an authentic brand. You know, it's like they're just complete mishmash. So, you know, it's simple things like that, which can seem really minor, but they all contribute to having a really strong brand. And that's what can get out of sync, I think, over time, isn't it, when you evolve?
And look, there's a bit of a sort of an irony in branding, in that you want it to be really authentic and a true reflection of you. But the hardest thing to do is to find that authenticity and that reflection of you yourself. So, for example, I am a brand specialist, but branding me was like the hardest project I've ever done. Because it's very hard to see yourself through those objective eyes as well. And there's a real, you know, everyone talks about mindset in everything. But there is a real mindset in branding, which is about being able to cut through some of the noise and be able to be decisive, make decisions about your branding, be really clear about who you are, and not let all the other things, all the other noise and opinions kind of get in the way of that. And when you're doing that for yourself, it's really, really hard. I think that's one of the pluses of working with someone or a team when it comes to your branding, particularly when you're rebranding, because your rebrand is when you have gone through that. I started here because I needed to just get started, but I've gone on a journey now for the past few years, and there's misalignment, or I've evolved, or all those reasons that we've talked about. So when you're doing that rebrand, getting a fresh pair of eyes is really important, because it's very hard to be able to see the wood for the trees when you do it yourself. And I'm the first person to admit that, because even though it's my area, I found it incredibly hard.
Yeah, I agree. Coming out of, marketing for businesses for 20 years, then building a brand that was a personal brand of me, I was like, I don't even know where to start, because I'm not used to being the face of the brand. I wasn't used to creating a brand around myself. I was very comfortable with creating brands for businesses, and it was hard. And I think, certainly my first year or so, I was really just muddling my way through, thinking, well, I'm just going to do what feels right to me, what I kind of like, and my brand evolved. And I did go through a couple of minor refreshes just to kind of bring in the consistency, reconsolidate over the time. When I got to that next stage where I went, okay, I've got more clarity now. But even, things like getting your brand photos done, like the first time it was hard, because I know what I don't want, but what is really me? And I just felt so awkward. By the time I got, the next set done, I was so much clearer, and the results were just completely different. And it was just about really understanding what that was, what it was that I wanted to get across, and who I was, and how I wanted, how I wanted to or how I could describe, I guess, what my brand was. Then the photographer could really work with me to make that happen. So
and look, you touched on something really important there, which is, what is a rebrand? You talked about making a tweak, and sometimes a rebrand is only, it's not one thing. It's not a complete reinvention. It's not, right, we're going to change the name, we're going to change the logo, we're just going to throw everything out and start again. That's not a rebrand. A rebrand is first and foremost understanding, like we said in the beginning, your strategic reason for doing it. But then it's kind of understanding, how far do I need to go to meet this objective? And that could be small tweaks. That could be, well, look, it's just become a bit of a mishmash. It's become confused. We just need to pad it into shape. Or it could be, actually, now we're sending out all the wrong messages. This isn't aligned to where I want to be, and we do need to look at something more radical, more revolutionary, and anything in between. So, a rebrand can be many different iterations. It can be a small tweak. It can be a bit more of an evolution. We're keeping the same name. We're keeping some of the equities that we know our audience will recognize, certain colors, for example, or it can be a complete and utter change. And that's part of the strategic process, is understanding how big that change needs to be.
Yes. And I think that probably leads us on to, I'm sure it will be one of your 7, is that sometimes, and I've been certainly working for companies where we've had to rebrand to a completely new brand. So it wasn't, growing up, it wasn't tweaking, consolidating, and, lifting to the next level. It was actually, no, we've had either a merger, or something's happened, or there was an acquisition, or the brand had been in a place where, it really had some really negative equity around it, and it was a smart business move to rebrand and to, I guess, clean the slate. So, been in all of those situations, and they're much, much bigger projects. But, what do you have to say about that?
Look, reputation is a really important one, and it's definitely a compelling reason to rebrand. I've worked with clients where they, a company may have gone into liquidation, but it's then been acquired, but that does leave a lot of baggage, or, there may have been issues in the past around service. If you as an individual in that brand, you might have been going through a difficult time. It might have been early stages of motherhood, for example, and you weren't delivering at your best, perhaps when you reflect. There are lots of reasons why, if you're honest with yourself, maybe your brand reputation has suffered over time. Maybe there were some issues with a courier service that you didn't have control over, but they've created, long-term damage. So there's lots of reasons why your brand reputation can suffer. And sometimes that's not a brand issue. That's a different kind of fix through marketing. But sometimes it does need a sort of brand intervention, if you want to call it that, to kind of change things up. And that might be ultimately a complete rename and a rebrand. or it could be something softer to kind of let everyone know that things have changed, and to sometimes address some of those reputational issues head on. Just to use an example, I think Aldi do it brilliantly. You know, they've had all these things around, you know, issues about their trolleys and the fact that you've got to go and get their trolley. You can't dump their trolley anywhere. You've got to go and get your money back. Issues with the checkout, the way they throw stuff down at you. But they actually, and they're potential reputational negatives, and they started to become those things, but they address them in their communications really well and have made those things, that tone of voice even of how they confront those things, part of their brand. So there are lots of ways to kind of deal with reputational issues, but branding is kind of, sometimes that might be a reason to rebrand if you think your reputation suffered a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think I've got one more, because I promised
seven. Okay, great.
And this is a really important one, and this is about your magnetism. And I think, again, so many brand, or particularly in the early days, you start off and you talk to what you do. And I see so many brands getting built around that what, you know, things like, you know, I have worked with a client called Specialized Advice. That's what they named themselves, which is actually just what they did. Like, they were a financial planner. It was a tagline. And, you know, I think when you're in that space where you realize your brand is very much talking to the what and isn't really getting under the skin of the emotional connection and talking to the what you do for your audience kind of space, that's a really good reason to rebrand. If you want to build your magnetism, become more emotive, really talk to the transformation that you create for your audience, then it's quite common to start to not really have that nailed down in the early days. But as your brand evolves, and if you have a sense that you're not doing that effectively, it's a really good opportunity to look at your branding.
Yeah, interesting. And so is that something that you'd look at the visuals and the messaging, or the positioning, or because I guess they're probably in the space, but it might just be the way they're communicating could be the difference, talking to the what instead of the why.
Yeah, and I think it's everything. And I think that's that kind of comes back to the scale of rebranding. Whatever the strategic reason or reasons, there may be multiples that you need to do it. That's the first thing to understand is why you're doing it. And the second thing to understand is what do we need to change to achieve that shift in perception. It could be just a change of the visuals. It could be just a change of the messaging. It could be all of those things and more around how you're positioning yourself in the market. So I think there's multiple levers you can pull around your brand and your branding, whether it be visual or how you talk, your tone of voice, how you're conveying that transformation in the message. And I think before you even start putting pen to paper or briefing someone or whatever you're going to do, having that clarity of why you're doing it and what needs to shift to achieve the goals is really is important.
Yeah, absolutely. They are all fantastic points. You know, I really think there is so much to it, and you know, branding is such an important part of your overall strategy with, you know, how you're positioning the market. That, you know, but it's something that I think, you know, you get to that point where you really need a proper brand strategy. And in the beginning, you know, for people who are literally starting up on day one, you're probably just not at that point of going that deep yet. You know, you really need to sort of get a bit of a feel for what you're doing and who you're working with, and start to get that feedback from them as well. And then that's at that time where you think, right, okay, we've got to one of these 7 stages. We're ready to grow up, or we're ready to refresh. We're ready to actually, you know, really connect these pieces of the brand and make it a lot stronger. You know, and I think that, like you say, it may be some things that the outside world may not notice, but overall they will get a stronger connection with you through it. Because I think I actually do some behind the scenes changes on my brand I won't say I do them regularly, but I've been known to.
Are you tweaking, Jess?
I do little bits of tweaking here and there. I just went through and I tweaked my color palette, which you would not even notice because they're still the same colors. They're just slightly different shades that, you know, really felt like, you know, I hadn't quite got it there, but I'd left it for 4 years, because I'm like, it's not that important. They're not going to choose whether they buy from me based on the exact shade of color. But, you know, it got to a point where I did a few little updates. Right now I've moved to Kajabi and they don't have my fonts. So on my Kajabi site, hey, I've got new fonts. Do you think anyone's going to notice? Probably not. So, you know, there's like little things that just happen in the course of business, but then there'll get to be a point where I think, right, now I actually need to consolidate again and bring all this together and really reconnect to make sure that it's all a nice, consistent package that I'm putting out there. So, you know, and that's one of the times where, you know, you're ready for a rebrand.
Yeah, look, I think again you've touched on a really important point, and I did a post about it recently, was how het up people get about consistency and what that means in branding. And everybody gets really fixated on it's using this one font, or it's using these 3 hex colors, and then I'm being consistent. But that's only just a very small part of it. Being consistent is really, how consistently do you show up? How consistently do you deliver your message? What's the consistent experience that you create with your brand? And, you know, when people connect with you, there's so many factors to consistency. It's not just the visual. And the visual can kind of, you know, it can ebb and flow, and it can, you know, as long as you understand what your core, the visual expectation is of your brand at its core, you can kind of, there can be a bit of light and shade around that.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, being someone, I know with my Myers-Briggs profile, I'm an ENFP, I think, and we don't like to be constrained by rules. So now that I don't have really, really big brand guidelines and I have to be super, super specific like we did in the corporate days, I love having a little bit of flexibility in my brand. And for me, it's, you know, I don't think anyone else would look at what I do and say, oh, there's no consistency in their brand, because I'm always true to the core premise, you know, the values and the personality and the style of what I want to get across. I always do that. And there is a little bit of flex in there, which, you know, I really like that fact of being kind of in control of my own brand.
Well, brands are like people, you know,
do that.
And having that, so, you know, when you connect with people, you don't expect them to be wooden. You don't expect them to behave the same all the time. You don't expect them to always show up in exactly the same outfit. You know, that sort of light and shade and difference and flexibility and surprise sometimes are what make people attractive and magnetic. And the same goes for brand. It's got to have depth and layers. You know, being just rigidly stuck to a formula is not what makes a strong brand.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you lose all that emotion. And I just find that there is no emotional connection. Whereas when you can operate within the flow and in your energy and let it come out and not be tied to the perfectionism of it, that is what connects. You know, that's where, you know, when I finally let go of all of that, which, you know, it took a good year or so getting out of corporate before I could let go of it. But
yeah, there are reasons why corporates are that have to be more controlled about their branding. But when you've got hundreds of people who are using and interacting with a brand, it's a slightly, you know, but when you and maybe a team of just you, or, you know, 3, 5, 10 people, then you can have a little bit more flex in there.
Absolutely. And I used to be one of the controllers of the brand, being head of marketing. That was my role, you know, develop the brand. I was very, you know, protective of it. But I think that, you know, when I started working for startups as well, I realized that there can be a bit of flex here, and it was really, really great to, you know, see how you can use it and evolve it and really work within it, as opposed to, you know, when I've been in some big global companies and it was just, you know, to the letter, to the T, where you could not budge outside of these guidelines or else. And you know, I think that's where they're probably starting to find, hey, they've got to keep moving and going with the flow, and they've got to, you know, evolve their how they communicate and how they come across as well, because we're not beings that don't move. You know, humans are, you know, we're energetic beings, and we connect with energy. So yeah, excellent. Well, I have to thank you very much for joining me today. This has been a really great chat, and I think you and I could probably talk about branding for at least another hour.
We proved that
to anyone. But thank you so so much. And I know that you are going to be an amazing resource for the members of the Momentum Club as our brand expert. So thank you as well for coming on board with that. And if anyone would like to connect with you, how do they best find you, Bec?
Definitely on Instagram. So Bec Hughes Branding, or my website, which is Bec Hughes, just bechughes.com. And Hughes is Hughes.
Yeah, always good to spell it out just in case. I always have to spell my last name and people still put the E on the end. So yeah. Funny. Thank you so much. And if anyone who is on the replay, thank you for watching the replay. Always drop us a comment, a question, and either Bec or I are more than happy to answer. Otherwise,
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So if you would like to improve the marketing of your business, then the first place we always start is with your ideal customer avatar. Now, my system for your ideal client is different to most. With my ultimate customer avatar worksheet, there are 35 questions to help you really deep dive into what your ideal client is currently thinking, feeling, and what their goals are, what they're doing in their buying behavior. Go to jessicaosborne.com/customer-avatar to download your free copy of my ultimate customer avatar worksheet today. And let's get started on defining who that ideal client really is.